So, hi everyone, my name's Aster Haile. I'm a Program Research Officer here at Asian Society Australia, and I'm also the lead of the Gen A program. So as James mentioned, today's event is the latest in our series of Gen A Masterclasses, which really look to spotlight people who've had engaging and interesting careers in the region, either in the region or working closely with the region, and to just really hear from them about those experiences, but also their advice for young people who might want to get into careers in those same areas. So Lisa, as a bit of an introduction, could you just tell us a bit about your background in politics, kind of your journey to get there and what made you want to pursue a journey and career in politics?
Well, thank you so much, Aster and James. Wonderful to be here at Asia Society in Melbourne and with so many young professionals in the room and online out there. Look, that question could really fill up the whole evening. So I'll try to sort of cut it down a little bit. I think if I look back on growing up, I grew up in the small island state of Tasmania, and I was the daughter of an Indo-Fijian father who migrated as an international student to Australia in the 1960s. When the White Australia policy was still very much live and well, and there weren't many people with brown skin in Tasmania at that time. But he met my mum, and my mum was is Anglo-Australian who was from Sydney. She had migrated to Tasmania as well, but as a young child, because her father, my grandfather, was in the Second World War in Papua New Guinea and contracted malaria. And a lot of returned servicemen were sent to cooler climates. So she grew up in Tassie. So I grew up with these two different cultures of my mum and my dad. And I obviously carried that through my school years, where it was not a very multicultural environment, going to an all-girls Catholic school. But what I learnt from that time is obviously the cultural differences between my two parents, but also the values that came from them and from my school that I was privileged to have and learn. Some of those values obviously were respect for difference and diversity amongst people, and another was the value of equality and social justice. So if I fast forward from that time of growing up in Little Tasmania, which was a fairly, sort of sheltered place, but also, not a place where I saw a lot of people that looked like me. We used to have pujas, which were, Hindu religious ceremonies in each other's houses, because there was no Indian temple in Tasmania, for example. But I grew up learning about those sorts of different cultural experiences from my dad's side, until I got into university and did not at all think I would end up in politics, but started to work out the sorts of, where I sat, I guess, on the political spectrum and what interested me. So fast forwarding out of all of that, I started really in the women's movement. I really was interested in women and girls' rights, and so started to be involved in community groups that allowed for me to contribute my ideas in that environment. And it really was the sort of culmination of that and led me to actually stand for politics. And for me, that was just taking advocacy to a different level. It wasn't really about this sort of burning desire to be a politician. It was really a burning desire to have policy influence and to bring people, I guess, in a leadership sense, on a journey of how can I convince other people, whether it's in a committee or a boardroom or more broadly when you're into politics, like in a town hall, how can I convince them that my ideas are going to be better for society? So that sort of advocacy really is something that started when I was probably quite young. It's something that it just extended by wanting to stand for politics and take it that little bit further.
I think that's very relatable. I think for a lot of people here in the room, I know I'm mixed race with it, my dad being from Africa, my mum being white Australian, and kind of growing up with both of those cultures. I think as part of our Gen A network, it is really a group of young people who've had those similar experiences, either maybe being Asian Australian and growing up here with that mix, but also a lot of people who are interested in policy advocacy. So did you find that your kind of background had an influence on your experience in Parliament? Do you think, what was your experience there being a person of mixed race, being the first Indian person of Indian heritage in Australian Parliament?
Yeah, I definitely felt like I was an anomaly in Australian Parliament. I think, in general, as Australia's Parliament and parliamentary systems, our democracy as a whole, has got a lot better on gender equality. But I still think it has a bit of a longer way to go in terms of diversity within our parliament to reflect the multicultural society that we live in. And particularly in 2010, when I got into the Senate, I didn't realise until I did an SBS radio interview where the question was put to me, so Lisa, what's it like being the first person of South Asian heritage to be elected to the Australian Parliament? And I was quite shocked by the question because I actually didn't think I would have been, knowing that we had a growing South Asian community throughout Australia, that it would be more reflected. And that's why I wrote a piece recently on the outcome of the New South Wales election, because it was so pleasing to see a number of South Asian people elected into that parliament. So I think things are actually starting to change. But it wasn't just being a woman of South Asian heritage in Parliament. It was also being someone from a very small state. A beauty of our Senate is that it is actually equal representation per state. Now, that may irk those from New South Wales or Victoria. Why does Tasmania have the same number of senators as the rest of the country when it's only got 500,000 people? But what it means is we do have that equal representation when we're debating ideas, as opposed to the lower house in Australia, which is based on population. But I did still feel like coming from Tasmania, I had to make my voice heard that little bit more. So there were different areas in which you had to sort of carve out your space. And, I was part of a party that was very, its values fitted very closely to my own values. And I felt very supported in that environment. But in the broader political environment, well, that's, it's not for the faint-hearted, put it that way.
Yeah, great to hear about the New South Wales Parliament and kind of changing diversity there. I know that the recent federal election it's kind of the most diverse parliament that we've ever had in Australia, which is really kind of a great update from previous years. Do you think from your experience, like representing Australia abroad, because you have been a representative of Australia for a few different organisations and delegations, that other countries in the region, leaders in the region care and notice those kind of things when you are out there?
Look, if I take India as an example for this question, whenever I'm in Delhi, I feel like I'm in this international city. It really feels like New York or London, because on any given day, there are world leaders visiting Delhi. Now, maybe that's just at the moment because we all know that India is becoming very much a superpower. But it really means that when Indian government or Indian leaders are engaging with those of us from Australia, they sort of know that we're going to be in that international environment with them as well. I don't think they necessarily think that someone from Australia should look like a certain identity. I think they recognise that we are a multicultural country and that it has a very large growing Indian diaspora. I think our Indian diaspora in Australia is up to nearly 1 million now. And that's grown exponentially, like at 30% in the last 10 years. So being someone of Indian origin, visiting India, but representing my country, Australia, I think they recognise as part of the fabric of who we are as Australians as a whole.
Yeah, and I think Penny Wong has been referring to that a lot in her engagements in the region as like the modern face of Australia, and really kind of emphasise that when relating to these countries, to say, we're not the white Australia that you might think we might be, kind of just aligned with the US and aligned with Europe, but we really are part of the region. When you look at, the background of most Australians, I think it's somewhere close to 30% of Australians have some kind of like Asian heritage. I think over 50% of Australians have family who were born overseas. So, it really is a different Australia to what it was, 50 or 100 years ago.
That's right. And I think our foreign ministers made a real point of saying we are not the Anglosphere. We are a multicultural, diverse country, and that we do live in the Indo-Pacific region. We are part of this region. So, shaping our identity through that sort of diplomacy is very helpful when we are engaging with countries like India and the region.
Yeah. So interesting to hear a bit about, I guess, your experiences through the Australian political system. In terms of representing Australia, because I know that you've been on kind of UN missions, UN delegations, you've done kind of looking over elections in other countries. Could you just tell us a bit about your experiences on some of those missions, maybe some of the experiences you got to do through your time as a politician?
Well, I have to say, I've always said that, being a politician, being in politics is a privilege, because you are only there because you're elected by the people that put you there. But more than that, it's a privilege because you do get opportunities that not everybody would get. Now, one of those for me was in 2016 when I got to be a Australian representative or delegate based out of the Australian mission in New York to the UNGA, to the United Nations General Assembly for that 3-month period. That enabled me to do so many things. It was basically like politics on the international stage, because I had to sit down with other countries and negotiate statements, positions on how we could deliver on certain issues. One of those I remember was, at that time, was the Paris Agreement on climate change. So Australia has some like-minded countries. We call ourselves the CANS group, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I worked a lot with the CANS group on statements like that one. We wrote out what would be our position, and I got to deliver that statement in third committee and second committee. So, that was a real privilege and opportunity, not only to obviously deliver it on behalf of my country, but also to have that ability to negotiate with other countries on what would be the wording that we would all agree on and go together on. That sort of ability to sort of group together is what really the UN is all about, right? Finding that common ground between us. So I did that on Paris. I did it on women's rights issues as well, something close to my heart. So that was amazing. It really was. And just to learn about the whole UN system and structure, the committees that it has and how they all operate and work. Everyone thinks of the UN in terms of the UNGA, which is that big forum, which has obviously all of the countries, 193 countries that all sit in there for that 1 or 2 weeks of the leaders meeting as part of the UNGA. But the UN has all these other structures and components to it as well. Of course, the UN Security Council is very well known, which play a really important role. And I guess I got to be a part of that. I did bring with me, Aster, a copy of, I came out of that whole period and really wanted to reflect on what it meant for me as a senator, but also to represent my country at that sort of international level and share it back home with, particularly young people who may be thinking about what sort of career journey they want to go on. So I was thinking more at the high school level at that point. So I did prepare like a little report at that time, something that they could just, as a snapshot really of my time there, something that they could just take away and see and think about. And I've brought one copy with me tonight. So just as a prop, I'm going to hand it around the room. Sorry for those on the screen. Just give a bit of an idea of my time at the UN. But look, that was probably, the most sort of impactful for me during my time in politics. I've obviously continued, though, in my current role to have opportunities for those sorts of, cross-country dialogues and things. And one of the ones in my current role as CEO of the AustraliaIndia Institute was last year, which was a real big one. And that was the Australia-India Leadership Dialogue. So this is a track 1.5 dialogue made up of ministers and business leaders and academic leaders, all in a room debating the issues that matter between Australia and India. And so this particular forum was co-chaired by myself and one of Australia's most prominent business leaders, which is Mike Cannon-Brookes, who is the co-CEO of Atlassian, but he's more well known for being such a strong advocate on turning the whole of Australia into a renewable energy country. So we had a strong focus on renewable energy. We had Penny Wong and Minister Jay Shankar, India's external foreign minister there, delivering as well. And just to sort of be engaged at that high level on high-level issues that matter to both of our countries. How are both of our countries going to reach net zero emissions? How are both of our countries going to address the changing sort of geopolitics in our Indo-Pacific region? How are we both going to address the skills shortages that we face to meet the growing demand in the changing dynamics that we live in? And how are we going to, post-COVID, deliver services in a way that we need to deliver them in a digitized world? So some of those were the issues we discussed, and it was incredible to be engaged with leaders from both countries on solving some of these challenges we face.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the dialogue that you had last year, because I know that since then you've also had a lot of engagements with really senior level leadership in the bilateral relationship. So I know you went on the delegations with all of the kind of top CEOs that went with Anthony Albanese to India, and also a lot of university vice chancellors went on a big visit this year, as well as meeting with Modi personally a few times. So you've had kind of really high level insights into that relationship. Would you mind just letting us know about some of the key challenges and opportunities that you see in the bilateral relationship over the next few years? You just mentioned kind of energy is one of those that Mike Cannon-Brookes is obviously really passionate about, but any other insights that you might have on that?
Yeah, look, I think this is where, governments can only do so much. And I think what we've seen, Aster, is a really strong commitment from both Australia and India as two governments that want to have a closer relationship with each other, which is fantastic. I mean, if you go back to 10 years ago, but even further, once upon a time, Australia and India were on the opposite sides of the Cold War blocks. We were not friends. We just had Prime Minister Modi visit for the second time. And you saw this sort of friendship between Prime Minister Albanese and Prime Minister Modi. We do have common interests now. And those interests, yes, are geopolitical to some extent, but they are also about dealing with some of the global challenges that both of our nations face. And I think energy is certainly one of those. India obviously has a very large energy need, having such a large population. Australia also has a lot of, resources here that we can support India on in terms of it, transitioning into a decarbonised economy. So there's lots of complementarity there. All of that, though, I think in terms of governments' commitments to each other in making it happen, really, though, needs the commitment from business to come on board. So, yes, we have an interim free trade agreement now, for example, but we know that our trading relationship, Australia-India's trading relationship, is like 10% of what it is with Australia's trading relationship with China. We've got a long way to go to really make substance out of this relationship. I know there's a lot of rhetoric. So what I would like to see is a lot more of Australian, big companies wanting to invest in India, wanting to help India actually deliver on its big agenda would be fantastic. I think that our trading relationship, could be a lot better. I think there needs to be a stronger understanding about each other as two countries as well. That's where think tanks like Asia Society and Australia-India Institute play a role. But, in the main, that we are in an amazing sweet spot. And, the timing is fantastic to be working in this space. But I would like to see more Australian businesses stepping up.
Yeah, so clearly at the moment, there's a big emphasis on government-to-government relations. With the CEO delegation going out, obviously there's kind of increasing interest as well through businesses, and with people trying to kind of de-risk from being too reliant on kind of one source in the region. That's a really big focus. But in terms of like cultural ties, because obviously there's a lot of Indian people living in Australia, Australian people maybe love Indian food, but the cultural ties as something that I think there could be more work on. Is there anything that you have as the CEO of the Australia-India Institute, any kind of programs or initiatives that are running or that you think, would be really helpful for building those cultural ties as well?
Yeah, well, look, I think this is where state governments need to play a role. And I am pleased to say the Victorian state government is doing that in terms of having some sort of agenda or strategy about how to build those cultural ties. So the Victorian government was the first in Australia to have an India strategy. I understand Queensland is about to launch their India strategy. We are doing some work at the Institute for the Victorian government on looking at Victorians' attitudes towards the Indian diaspora to see if there are gaps in terms of inclusion. I think, we do need to make sure that if we're going to continue to welcome Indian students or professionals to Australia, that there is that cohesion within Australia to make sure that they are welcomed here as well. I know a lot of sort of diaspora groups do a lot of work in that space too. I think we need to just go beyond the celebrating of festivals, to be honest. As colourful and fantastic as they are, I'm looking at Karam Mehta there, who once covered me at a Holi festival with all sorts of colourful powder. I think we need to go a bit deeper to understand each other a bit better. And it's the same on the India side. I mean, I think there is still a slightly outdated perception of Australia as well. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we got rid of the White Australia policy, so you can't necessarily blame India for that. And then there was the student, fiasco that happened in 2009 here that's still brought up with me when I'm in India. Now, we have come a long way as two nations and in terms of Australia in how we support and engage with our Indian diaspora here. But I think there is always more work we could do. And I think as an institute, we should be doing more work probably in this space too. Some of the things we do at the moment, though, is invite Indian students for chai and samosa. We have all sorts of visitors that we invite and welcome people. One of the fantastic things we've just delivered, which was on behalf of the Australian government, was these Australia-India Research Students Fellowships. And so this was inviting 35 Indian postgrad students to Australia, and 35 Australian postgrad students have gone to India to do an exchange for 8 weeks. So, of course, they're doing their research, but it's so much more than that. It's about building those cultural ties, those long-lasting experiences you have by being in another country and learning about the culture while you're there. And so we hosted some of those visiting Indian students recently at the Institute. And, they were all first-time visitors to Australia, and they were getting a massive exposure of what our country is like. That was really, really exciting. I'd like to see more of those sorts of exchanges.
Yeah, I think cultural exchange is a really interesting way to build those better ties. And for us as Australia, we are quite a small country in terms of population. We're a middle power, but we don't really have the same kind of size that India has. We don't have a big population of Australian people living in India, of Australian students studying there. So do you think that India sees us as a priority in the same way that the Australian government and Australian businesses are really targeting India? Do you see that as a two-way street, or do you think it's at the moment more Australia that needs to be selling itself to India rather than the other way around?
Yeah, Aster, I think it's very much the latter. I think, we need India more than India needs us. We know that Prime Minister Modi is about to go to the United States. The US-India relationship is really quite strong at the moment and has been for some time. India is engaging with a number of other countries as much as it is with us. But having said that, when I had the opportunity last year to host India's External Affairs Minister, Minister Jaishankar, he actually said, and I quote him, he said, in terms of India's priorities of countries that we are looking at, I would put Australia in the top 5. So that's good. I think in that sense, we are a priority in the top 5. But for us, I think we see India as crucially more important. And I think it's not just in a bilateral sense, it's in our engagement with India in the Quad, in terms of being shared democracies in that Quad, platform. It's very helpful for us when we're talking about the sort of geopolitical challenges we're dealing with. But I think at the same time, when I say we need India more, it is very much also in terms of building our own economy here.
Yeah. I think top 5 is not too bad for a country of our size. We can't hope for too much. So, better than top 20. So we'll go to questions from the audience in a minute, both online and in person. So if anyone has those, you'll get a chance to ask them in a moment. But I just want to finish up my questions by asking if you have any advice for young people who are really passionate about leadership, who are passionate about kind of changing policy and changing things in Australia or in the region. Just any general advice you might have for people looking to kind of follow that career path, not necessarily into politics and maybe politics, but just anyone looking to, really have that chance to make a positive change through policy.
Well, look, I think leadership all starts by having ideas. So if you are someone that has ideas, then you just need to think about how you want to share those ideas. Part of that is having a sense of purpose, right? It's sort of like, okay, I really believe in this and I think this about this and I've got these ideas. Create that into your sense of purpose. How am I now going to sort of share that in a broader sense? That, though, has to be backed up, I believe, by having a set of values. So the thing that's always guided me through the up and down roller coaster that is politics is my values. Everyone's values may be different from each other's, but working out what your values are, because that is really what will sort of bind you and guide you as you navigate all of the various ideas and the hurdles that you face along the journey. I really think also, though, you have to wake up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror. I mean, this is really my integrity value, and go, am I being true to myself? Being in politics, it is. I think Barack Obama said it's the art of compromise. It is the art of compromise, unfortunately. But that shouldn't sort of, deter you from not seeing the importance of what is your sense of purpose, what it is you believe in, and what it is that drives you to actually want to make a difference in your world of leadership. It's just about prioritizing which battles you're going to pick at which time. Sense of purpose, values, always be coming forward with ideas and recognize that, there's no sort of strict formula when it comes to leadership. But, you do have to have some self-belief, and you do have to have some sense of purpose to really want to go out there and share your ideas to change your workplace, your community, your society, the world, whatever level you're trying to do that.
Cool. Well, thanks for your insights, especially that last one. It's so applicable to every kind of industry and every sector that people in this room are working in, not just in politics. So thank you for that. So now we have time for questions from the audience. So if you're online, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll have someone in the room read them out for you. So hopefully we'll get to answer all of those. If you're in the room, please feel free to just pop your hand up and my colleague Jaffrin will come around with a microphone. Even if you think you've got a loud voice, please use the microphone just so that everyone who's online can also still hear what those questions are. Oh, yeah, we've got a few questions here, Jaffrin, up here.
You working? Yep. So hi, Rhythm from Marsh McLennan. Thanks for attending today. I just want to ask, given your vast experience with geopolitics, what's something that still surprises you from stakeholders, perhaps, about Australian-Indian relations, like their perception, perhaps? Thanks.
Thanks, Rhythm. Look, I'm still surprised by how outdated some Australian business people's mindsets are about India. I know India has been, on this massive sort of growth trajectory in terms of building its economy in the past decade or more. Well, basically since the 1990s when it really started to open up, economically speaking. But, it has lifted millions of people out of poverty. And it is now, the third largest economy in the world. To sort of have that outdated mindset at the business level is something that still really surprises me. But it makes me realise that there is a lot of work that we need to do to actually try to go out there and change that mindset, something I call building India literacy.
I think Judy had a question up here.
Thank you so much, Lisa. My name is Judy from the AFL Asia Advisory Board, and great to hear about you to share the importance of the cultural connections about the two countries of peoples. We have AFL has a community clubs in India, run by Australians who working in India. So the current difficulty is how we connect with the local Indian communities and business and sponsorships. So do you have any suggestions how to do that relationship to develop the AFL community club in Asia bigger with the community engagement?
Thank you, Judy. So how do we build our connections in India in a community club sense? Look, just like in business, the advice is always to find a local partner on the ground. I don't think India is a country where it's not transactional. It's about relationships, and it's about really being connected and building those long-term relationships. I think, former High Commissioner and Secretary of DFAT, Peter Varghese, who wrote the India Economic Strategy, the blueprint that we call it, he did say that, investing in India, engaging with India is for the long term. It's not some sort of quick in and out sort of relationship situation. So finding local partners on the ground and having those partners then help you connect with those others that you want to connect with.
Thanks, Lisa. I think there was a question over here as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Karan. Thank you so much for giving such a wonderful talk. As a chairperson of the Indian Student Association, I've never got a chance to thank you for the amount of work you've done for us. And I'm sure over the past 11 years or even 11 plus years of you being around in the community, you've tried to raise your voice try to make a difference for the South Asian community. So now seeing the India-Australia relations so strong, how do you see the projection of future? Do you ever see that there'll be an Indian origin prime minister in the parliament?
Well, if the UK can do it, we can do it, right, Karan? Look, thank you, Karan. I see the future is very bright, but it's bright because we have leaders in the Indian student community as well, and in professional communities, the Australia-India Business Council and the like. These groups all play leading roles in terms of actually changing the perception we were talking about earlier of Australians seeing India. I'm always the optimist. So the future, if you ask me, what's in 10 years time, what's the decade look like in terms of Australia-India relations? I would want to say we've got this, this free trade agreement where we've got, no tariffs on most of our exports. I'd like to see our size of our trade investment to be a lot bigger than the 27 billion a year that it currently is. I would like there to be more people of diverse backgrounds, particularly South Asian, at the boardroom level. I mean, we all saw probably that Watermark report that came out recently. It's really quite devastating when it comes to the top ASX companies in Australia in terms of their boardroom lack of diversity. But then, of course, that extends also to vice chancellors and politicians and other areas of leadership. I would love that to be reflective of our broader society, which is, as I said, nearly 1 million people of Indian heritage. So I hope it definitely will be brighter.
Any other questions in the room or online in the Q&A box as well? Yeah, got a question over here.
Hi, Lisa. I'm Aaron from the Australian APEC Study Centre at RMIT. So I had a question about deepening cultural linkages. From my time in Australia, so I came over as an international student about half a lifetime ago. So, from my experience, constantly surprised by how many people I interact with, stereotype me in certain ways. So, for example, there's a common assumption that I work in IT, which, I have nothing against people who work in IT, but the number of, and I don't blame them as well, because I think it is skewed by Australia's migration policy. So it is easier for people with certain professional backgrounds to come here, whereas artists and musicians, for example, would find it a lot harder. So I was wondering what could be done to sort of diversify the base of people-to-people interaction. And I was heartened to see, as part of the interim trade agreement, that there is reference to extending the working holiday program, which I think could be really positive. And yeah, I was just wondering if you also had other ideas.
Thanks, Aaron. Look, I think your question is really on point. There is a lot of that stereotyping that continues to happen in Australia in terms of people of Indian origin. IT, you're either in IT or you drive a taxi. Look, this again is where I think things will get, looking at that 10-year mark into the future, I think things will definitely change based on, even if you look at sort of what came out of the Prime Minister Modi visit, this new migration agreement that's going to allow more mobility between both countries for professionals, students, and the like. I think we'll start to see a little bit of a changed behaviour, I hope, in terms of Australians' view of Indians here. But you're right, it's going to take time to change those sort of attitudes and stereotypes. And I think this is where organisations like the Australian Human Rights Commission and others can play a really leading role, that are well funded by government to make sure that we break down some of these, these sorts of biases, stereotypes, and the like. Of course, our university sector as well needs to play an important role, and I know that they are doing that. But I think it comes back to that old adage: you can't be what you can't see. And I think for us of South Asian heritage, those leaders out there saying, it doesn't matter, what sector you work in. This is Australia, and it's the country of the fair go, right? Everyone should feel included and have that ability to based on merit, to be able to contribute and work in whatever field that you like. We shouldn't just be saying South Asians have to work over here in IT. Having said that, there are some amazing IT leaders, and I think you're probably one of them.
Thanks, Lisa. When you mentioned how Tasmania is represented in the Senate, it made me think of how, when we talk about democracy, we don't really kind of prosecute how different democratic systems are across the world. We just kind of think, well, democracy is not dictatorship. So then, all democracies are superior. So look, not to advocate for authoritarian governments or anything, but what I want to ask was, with your experience in the Australian Parliament, obviously there'd be, so much frustration about, the system itself. You've got proportional representation, you've got first past the post. In the system, I guess, if you could change one thing about Australia's parliamentary system, to make it more democratic, are there things that you see in other democracies that you wish Australia had, or, like what's one thing that when you were in the system that, you'd like to, you would have liked to have changed, or you think, we could do much better at?
Yeah, thanks, James. Look, I'm quite passionate about different styles of democratic structures. Ours, of course, just like India's, is a product of the Westminster system that the British, left us with. And both countries, India and Australia, have tried to sort of nuance that system into being more contemporary in terms of what it is today. I mean, India obviously more so recently with its independence in 1947 and then its constitution in 1950. Our constitution way more outdated than that, and that's why we need to have the referendum to succeed. Can I just say this year to give our First Nations people a voice through that democratic structure. But for me, in terms of Australia's parliament and having, had an opportunity to be elected, well, I stood for election 5 times. I was successful 3 times. At the state level, very interesting and a different system again, because the Tasmanian state parliament uses the Hare-Clark system of multi representation per electorate. So only the ACT and Tasmania use that system. Some say that is the fairest system in the world, the Hare-Clark system, based on Thomas Hare and Andrew Inglis Clark. But in the Australian Parliament, one thing I would like to see changed is in the Senate. I think they should get rid of above the line voting, so that you actually vote for the candidate that you want. Now, having said that, if you did that in some of the large states like Victoria and New South Wales, the ballot paper would be very long. But above the line voting only came in the 1980s, and it was for that reason. I think the ballot paper was getting too long. But what it means is that it's very easy for voters to just go in and do a 1 above the line and just go with whatever the party ticket has been chosen, rather than actually choose the senator that they want in there. And I think what we've seen is a change in Australia's democracy in the last little while of, more independents being elected. So there's clearly a disquiet with some of the party political systems. So getting rid of above the line voting, I think, would address some of that, and that you still vote for whoever it is in the political party you want, but not letting the party determine the ticket order, I think would be good.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, look, we do need to sort out those, large, it's not even A-size ballot paper. It's just even beyond, it's indescribable. So anything that can sort that out. I might just keep the mic just to ask an online question we have from Ashrika Paruthi from the University of Sydney Students Representative Council and the Australia-India Business Council. How do you reckon we can encourage more international students from India to actively take part in Australia-India policy advocacy space? Especially since a lot of times visa-related concerns prevent them from participating in political discussions.
Yeah, look, the whole visa system, as we know, is a mess. I think our Home Affairs Minister has called it that itself. I've actually experienced a number of Indian students having frustrations with the visa system. So that is a definite real issue that needs to be addressed. And I think that's been brought up at the political level between our 2 countries as well. And something I know Australia is trying to address, but we've certainly got a backlog how can we promote more Indian students to come to Australia when they can't get a visa on time and the whole system is sort of, so bungled. So that is really important. And we experienced that by running that research students fellowship program. I was constantly chasing Home Affairs to make sure that some of those Indian students got their visa. I think, though, more broadly, I would love to see Indian students play a role in the policy space in terms of what they would like to see the Australia-India relationship look like, because they come with the experience of being from India, studying here in Australia, and then potentially some of them, becoming migrants that actually want to lay roots here. And, those people end up, carrying the hearts of two countries then, their home country of India and their new country of Australia. So they should be able to have an opportunity to contribute to what they want to see that relationship of the two countries look like. And mobility is something I think that a lot of people put their hand up as saying they want to see more ease of mobility. But, more broadly, I think there are structures already that are in place at the university level through Indian student groups and the like that are important. Reaching out to, research institutes like ours is another one. We have very much an open door policy and want to hear from Indian students. But also just recognising that this is a country where you can freely express your views as an Indian student. It's not going to impact your visa if you go out there and say, I have these policy issues that I want to share. This is a country of free expression and you should be able to do that.
Yeah. Does anyone have any final questions before we end tonight's session? Yeah, we've got a question over here. Daphne's just passing the microphone.
Hi, Lisa. My name is Sudeep. I'm from Global Victoria State Government. And just linking in a couple of questions earlier raised by, Aaron and Judy here. Personally, I've helped set up Australian rules football in India. And so just basing off Judy's question, and then also helped Indian sport of Kabaddi to be started in Australia, forming the first team. And so my question is like, what has been your experience with discussions from the top brass for both the countries? How is sport considered, as one of the emerging markets, given it's a big part of the society here in Australia, but has there been conversations between the ministerial level between the countries, and what has been your experience in that space?
Well, I think we all saw, thank you for the question. I think we all saw the two prime ministers riding around in a chariot on the Modi Stadium field in Ahmedabad earlier this year. And that pretty much put, at least cricket right up there in terms of importance in the bilateral relationship. Look, I'll never forget last November being at the T20 match here in Melbourne when, that I don't know if anyone was here. It was India and Pakistan. It was around the time of Diwali, and it was the incredible atmosphere of this mass amount of South Asian diaspora, all gathered, 100,000 at the MCG, experiencing this moment when India ended up winning, of course, and Virat Kohli really stole the show. It just really exemplified the incredible nature that sport plays, particularly cricket, though, in terms of the Australian-India relationship. I think it's great to hear about AFL, about the two sports sharing differences of sport. That's a whole new space, right? So great to hear that Global Vic are leading, obviously being the AFL capital of the nation, leading in that space as well. Look, there's so much good that comes from sport, and it's also, a very gender diverse space as well. I think our women's cricket teams are now doing so well. So I can't see necessarily, at the top level of our leaders needing really to invest more in sporting sort of bilateral relationship, because it is doing so much already. But to hear things like what state government in Victoria is doing, I think is really heartening as a new way forward. There's probably always more we can do. I just see that sport is always out there and doing really well for both of our countries, and such a bond. My dad, by the way, have to be the biggest fan, card carrying fan of North Melbourne Football Club.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think we can all agree that cricket is one tick on the cultural exchange thing that we've ticked off. So now we can think about other areas that we can keep developing those cultural ties. Thanks for all your insights, Lisa. So that's all the time we have today for questions. So just wanted to thank you for everything that you've done today. It's always really great, when busy people can take some time to share their insights and share their experiences with young professionals. We have a real range of people in this room, people who already knew about India, but also people who've come along tonight that didn't necessarily have, engagement with India previously, and would have learnt a lot, from you about all your experiences there, and also about leadership more generally. So just from Asia Society Australia, I just wanted to give these to you as a thanks.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thank you.